going to talk about the achievement gap and are we reaching all students. Okay, the achievement gap is defined as the gap in test scores between one group of students and another group of students. There's many different types of achievement gaps. For this presentation, I'm going to focus on the racial achievement gap. There's race, gender's a big one if you look at math and reading scores. Socioeconomic status, which we're going to learn actually plays into race. I really like this picture I put on the slide because it does show that achievement gap comes from a variety of different sources. You have your home-based sources, which also let you read it, and the school-based sources. One theory is that the school-based leads to the minority-majority student group gap, and the home-based is the low-income, high-income. Okay. So let's look at some stats. The achievement gap is this. This is from the NAEP long-term assessments. These are the ones that have been being used since the 1970s to look at reading and math scores. And you can look at and tell that there is a big gap between African Americans and Caucasians. And actually that gap increases between 4th and 8th grade math, and reading it stays about the same. The Hispanic gap also seems to increase in math, and in reading it stays about the same. And that is English as second language learners, Hispanic. So actually African Americans have a larger gap with whites than even Hispanics who are just learning the language. The other stat that's up here is family income, so that's socioeconomic status. You can see there's a strong correlation between amount of money made and scoring. That was based on the SAT College Board released those results. Top charts from 2009, bottom was from 2011. Okay. What I think was interesting is a guy named StevenLevitt. He was one of the writers on the Freakonomic book series, and he took those scores from the NAEP long-term test, and he came up with formulas to counteract some other things that might be affecting scores, because he wanted to just look at race. So he took out low birth rate students. He looked at age of the mother at date of child's birth. He looked at whether or not the family was participating in WIC. He also looked at their socioeconomic status. And he took all those and took them out of the equation. And he found two things. One I think is very encouraging, and one I think is very startling. The first was, if you look at backgrounds, whites, blacks, and Hispanics are all doing about the same when they enter school. There's not much of an achievement gap. Hispanic white was barely over, would have been like 0.05 standard deviation lower, and blacks would score about 1.5 standard deviations lower. I'm sorry, not 1.15 standard deviations lower. The thing that was startling was the Hispanic white gap shrank over time throughout schooling. And if you go with the weighted scores, there is no gap. With the black white gap grew over time. So this is one of the things that's not fully understood yet in the school system is why this gap does grow over time. Some say it's a cultural, some say it's economic status, some say it's because they get disengaged early on in school and it's hard to re-engage to the learning process. I'm going to bring up a success story though for you, a school that's doing things right. Ossining, if anyone knows out there, please correct me, New York, in 1970 they actually had race riots. There's a lot of racial tension in that area. The area in New York it's right by Westchester, really well-to-do neighborhood, and it's right next to a not as well-to-do neighborhood, we'll say. In 2003, they graduated well than less than half their minorities, or Hispanics and blacks. While graduating 85% of the white students, there is a huge gap at their school. So they decided they needed a change. So they started something called Project Earthquake in 2007. First thing they did was give professional development to teachers on dealing with students of different learning styles and teaching to diversity. They also opened up their AP courses so anyone could take them. African Americans and Hispanics still weren't taking them because they saw them as white courses and didn't want to be seen as uh, part of the white crowd. So they teamed up with a local college and began offering courses through dual enrollment called such as racism, sexism, and classism, the Black experience, and crossing borders. And actually, the racism, sexism, and classism this school year had 45 students enrolled in it. They also began in 6th grade taking class trips to historically Black colleges to show the minority students that there are people like them in higher education. And then for Hispanic students, they offered the English as second language students a math and science course to start their high school career with, to help transition them to the normal math and science classes. And let's see the results. In 2011, 75% of Black students graduated to 93% of white students. So that gap actually shrank 16 points. That's a big jump. That's a movement in the right direction. And Hispanic students, test scores rose from 62 to 81% efficient in 3 years. Okay, so that's a great success story. So by looking at that and by looking at my case studies, I came up with some 4 basic advice for administrators on the achievement gap. You should study the demographics of your community and understand what you're looking at. And with that in mind, you should develop PD or bring in PD that addresses learning styles, different learning styles, and that will help different genders. That'll help everybody. Genders, socioeconomic status, race, anything. Okay? And you should always aware your staff of that achievement gap that exists. So it's something that is in their mind that they're thinking about. Also, at your school, you should develop an early intervention program to close the gap early. With the amount of testing that's done currently, we should not let it go to waste. And we might as well figure out the target students or target groups and figure a way to hit them early. And by early, I mean kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, to keep them engaged in the learning process so that they're engaged their whole scholastic career. And sadly, a huge chunk of the gap is a socioeconomic status deal, where low incomes, low birth weight, even StevenLevitt found that one of the number one things that showed a student have good achievement is number of books in the house. Okay, we can't fix students' home lives, but we can give them a safe environment at school and give them times when they can be there more often. And that's for school programs, like Head Start, for the 3-4-year-olds. Make sure you offer breakfast at your school. You have to have before and after school programs. Like our school, we do tutoring, and we have different clubs that they can meet to keep the kids interested in school, so we don't lose them later on to try to close that gap. Thank you for listening. I hope you got something. Enjoy.